Well, we're not quite done eating and drinking.
Oh, we're going to have some more.
Hayden is here with
More food?
the final course of the evening. Hayden?
All right. And the final course.
Oh my goodness.
So the fourth course is sort of the bookend, and where we started with the egg and the nest. This is going to be an egg of goat cheese rolled in hemp and applewood ash on a bed of wizened fruit. That was a contribution by my father when we were talking about when, wintertime, things get old, they also become wiser. So we talked about the drying skins of pears, and so that was his direct contribution to the meal. And the fruit was reduced with amontillado, and we also added chocolate pot de creme. The flavors, like winter, are muted and warm. And the quote is my favorite of the night, and not just because it's poignant, but because it's from Pablo Neruda, who is one of my very favorite poets. And it is, someday, somewhere, anywhere, unfailingly, you'll find yourself, and that, and only that, can be the happiest or bitterest moment of your life.
Thank you. All right. I want to take it back to where we started this. I mean, ideally, someone listening to this would get the sense that these are important issues that they really need to consider and begin talking about with their doctors, with their family, with their loved ones. And we've covered many reasons of why that's the case, but I'd like to kind of leave it open to you at the end. If there's someone out there listening and they're almost there, but they're not quite there, what would you say to them to tell them that this is really an important conversation they should be having?
Almost there, but not quite there.
Yeah.
Meaning,
What do you
In terms of the
mean?
Almost ready
conversation?
to start talking about it.
almost ready to start talking.
No, I'm just talking about that. I'm saying they realize it's important, but they just can't quite open their mouth and start the conversation. What would your advice be to them to start the conversation?
One thing is to not be afraid to hire a pro to come
Exactly.
Talk.
Get some help. That's another thing.
and, even if it's just one session,
Yeah.
not be afraid
That's
to
good.
say, I want to talk to my family about death, and I'm scared,
Yeah.
or they're scared. Will you help?
I do those kind of personal
Yeah.
So
consultations,
someone to
and
facilitate
sometimes
the
that's what it
conversation
is.
to get the ball rolling.
And you can also do that even with physicians, because one of the things I wanted to bring back around when we were talking about how to talk to physicians and to bring a person, sometimes my clients hire me to go with them to their
Yeah.
physicians, not necessarily even about death, but about hard procedures, because it helps not just the patient, but also the physician.
Right.
Since I've been in not a physician role, but a provider role. And I hate to say it, but almost all of us behave better when there's a witness. And I've noticed that across the board whenever I work with healthcare providers, that when they know that they're being watched, it's a human thing.
It's just a human thing.
It's just a
isn't
human
it? Yeah.
thing that we're on our very best behavior.
And Tony and Greg,
You know
What would
what
you
my
like to-
advice to people is pick a moment that's going to work, that's going to feel private and safe for the person you're talking to. I know there's, for example, there's this whole thing about talking at Thanksgiving, and people like the turkey's out on the table, and you're like, well, I want to talk about what's going to happen, and I'm like, the time
Maybe not.
it might be the day before or something like that. So pick pick a moment that's going to work for the person that you're talking to. Think of success as starting the conversation and doing a little chunk, right? Because I think people feel like, oh my God, I've got to have this. I've got to have everything decided. I've got to talk about everything. And the reality is actually starting the conversation and saying, okay, we're going to talk about it for whatever they can take, 15 minutes. So my assignment is, you can talk for 15 minutes, set a timer. As soon as the timer dings, you both stop.
Nice.
And you
That's
know
good.
what?
Nice.
That's a way to get started, because
Yeah.
having a little success and starting to talk about some tiny little piece of it. Honestly, it could be the dog's death,
Yes.
right? and I, we have some of our most undefended relationships with our pets, right? So that's a whole other issue. But realizing that you can get started and making the boundaries on that first conversation really clear, so it's a really safe conversation. That's my big advice.
That's really good.
I like that,
wouldn't
Tony.
do
That's actually something I've done work with around physicians when they're having advanced care planning conversations with their patients, is to recognize you don't have to do it all at once, and you don't have to do it all at once. Have your nurse, as they're reviewing immunization updates, cancer screening, say, I notice you don't have an advanced directive in your chart. That's something we should talk about. Maybe at one of your later visits we can bring that up. It's both team-based and sequential. In terms of the listeners, I often find that using some triggering event, like listening to this broadcast, can be enough to say, I heard this interesting radio show, hopefully interesting radio show, on people talking about how they want to live at the end of life. And again, asking open-ended questions. Have you thought about that? How do you think I would want to do that? And really try and establish that shared language. And then leading to the conversation about, well, here's what I'm hoping for. And really using, again, hope as an action item, a verb, where you can really articulate how you want to see things go in general terms. And then over later conversations, as things get more specific, as a healthcare condition progresses and the clinical situation becomes more defined, then that narrows down into which treatment options would I choose or not choose. But then some of the early conversations, going back to what you talked about earlier, is who do I want to be my primary decision maker? If I'm, I'm going to drive home on I-5 if I'm in an accident tonight and my family needs to speak for me, have I defined who I want to be the person to step up and have the authority? And if so, what do they know about what I think?
Right. And ultimately, it's not about who's the legal person. Ultimately, it's not about the medical choices. Ultimately, talking about this is an act of love.
Yeah.
It's about that bond.
That puts a bow on it.
That's good.
Thank you so much. You're such a
Thank
great
you so
panel. I
much.
so appreciate you coming in. I want to let these people go home. They were working really hard. And I want the
Yes.
chefs to come in. 'Cause
Yes.
they really deserve
You're
it.
here.
Fantastic meal. And just a great job, you guys.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
What a great,
Beautiful.
great
Yeah.
Group of folks.
And
Fabulous.
very atmospheric for our conversation.
Yeah.
It was.
Tried
It
really tried
was.
as much as we could into it, so.
I think my dad kind of timed it that way too, because he had to be a part of this somehow. It was his last.
Well, he was.
His last
That-
guest. You guys.
Thanks to the crew back there. They're
Yes,
recording,
thank
getting
you,
it right.
guys.
And these guys on the cameras. And Scott, thanks for pulling the whole video end of it together. I really appreciate it.